In this video, we're going to recreate a top that's inspired by the brand Enduring Kairos. For this project, you're going to need scissors, pins, measuring tape, 2 colors of thread, and silk fabric. I chose a pretty lightweight fabric. I started out by placing tape on my mannequin to outline the shape of the top. There's going to be 2 sleeves, 2 pieces in the back, and 2 front pieces. With my pieces marked out, I'm now ready to drape my fabric. I'm going to start by pinning the side seams for my front piece, making sure to leave a 1 cm seam allowance along all the edges. Because of the volume from the bust, I'm going to need to add darts in a later step. You're now going to do the same draping technique, leaving 1 cm seam allowance for the back piece and the straps. As you can see, the seam allowance is going to pin together to create a side seam, and you want to make sure those 2 pieces line up. Keeping in mind your darts, you can trim down your front piece. And again, now doing the same thing for the sleeve. We only need to drape 1 back piece and 1 sleeve because we're going to use the same for the other side. And finally, we're going to drape the front bottom piece. When cutting this piece, make sure you have fabric on either side to create a hem, and also on the bottom. You can also drape all of these pieces on yourself if you're just wearing a t-shirt or a tank top to pin it to. On the back and sleeve pieces, you may need somebody else's help, but it's definitely doable without a mannequin. Now we have all the pieces to our pattern. We need to cut a couple multiples of these pieces. We need 4 back pieces, and 2 of these need to be mirrored. To mirror a piece, you just place right sides together when you're cutting. And then we need 4 sleeve pieces, and again 2 of these mirrored. And then we need to cut 1 more of the top front piece. And now we have all our pieces. Taking our sleeve pieces, we're going to place 2 right sides together and pin them along the edges. And then we're going to do the same for the other 2 pieces. And then with a straight stitch, we're going to sew along where we pinned. We want to make sure that we're just sewing the 2 long sides and not all the way around. To avoid fraying, I'm going to trim away the extra fabric and then go over the seam again with a zigzag stitch. As you can see, my needle's going over the side of the fabric to really lock in that thread. I'm now going to use an old sewing machine needle to help me flip my sleeves right side out. By tying it to the loose threads, I can now push it through, which will help me flip the sleeve. And then do the same for the other sleeve. Once they're flipped right side out, you can iron them down flat. We're now ready to sew the side seams. So placing right sides together and making sure that the back piece is angled downwards, you can attach both of your side seams. And pin for the other pieces as well, again right sides facing each other. And then you can sew along the 4 seams that you just pinned. With everything sewn, we're going to attach these 4 pieces together. We're going to do this by placing all right sides together and flipping our sleeves so they're facing downwards. And now lining up our seams and again placing right sides together, we're going to place on our second bodice piece, making sure that our sleeves are facing downwards. And then you're going to sew along where you just pinned. And then for this seam as well, I'm going to trim away the extra fabric and go over it again with a zigzag stitch. Now you're going to iron open the seam that we just sewed, pressing the seam allowance towards the back of the fabric. We're then going to top stitch down that seam allowance, sewing very close to the seam line and making sure to sew through that seam allowance. This top stitch should help us create a crisp edge for our neckline. We're now going to lock our darts into place. We're going to place pins where we'd like to put our darts, and then with the biggest stitch on the machine, and sewing our fabric layers separately, we're going to do a stitch between those 2 pins. Make sure not to sew a back stitch so we can pull at this thread. You can now try your top on and pull the thread as much as you need to for the darts. We're now ready to hem all 3 sides of the bottom piece of our top. We're going to do this by folding each side over twice, pinning it down, and ironing it. And then you're going to sew along all those 3 sides. The right side of our top piece is the one without the top stitch. So placing right sides together, we're ready to attach the top piece and the bottom piece of our top, making sure again to only sew through 1 layer of the fabric. Trim away the excess fabric and then go over it again with a zigzag stitch. We're now going to sew the other layer of the fabric. You're going to fold in the seam allowance 1 centimeter, tuck in the raw edge from the other layer, and pin it from the other side. Once you get to the back pieces, you're just going to tuck in both seam allowances 1 centimeter and fold them into each other. Once you're done all your pinning, you can sew along where you pinned. You can see here I sewed right into the stitch, so you can't see it from the front. Now we need to make a measurement for the bow piece. This needs to be long enough to tie a bow in the back and a bow in the front. It's going to be 2 separate pieces. My fabric wasn't long enough, so I had to cut extra pieces and attach them at the end to make it long enough. I ended up making 2 strips that were 5 centimeters by 100 centimeters. You're going to pin each of those strips onto the back piece of the fabric, placing right sides together. You want to make sure you have enough length to tie a bow in the middle, and then you're going to sew along with a straight stitch. Now you're going to fold and iron 1 centimeter on either side of that strip. Then you're going to fold the strip in half and pin it. And you're going to do this all along the strip. There should be no raw edges poking out. And you're going to pin down both of your strips. And then with your pink thread, you're going to sew along where you pinned. Then, trying the top on, I tied it in a bow and decided to put 2 little stitches to keep it in place. And you're all done. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please subscribe.